Welcome to the Ripple of Change podcast, searching for our quadruple aim, where we highlight, celebrate, and extol others creating positive change in healthcare and beyond. I am your host, Dr. Otten. Today's topic is 5 minutes to fix our broken healthcare system. Wow, lot to unpack already. I can see it. My guest co host today is Jim Cagliostro, who is a nurse and an amazing human being. Jim, I'm going to turn it over for you for a second.
Thanks for that generous welcome, Todd. Yeah, I've been a registered nurse since 2007. I enjoy what I do, and I'm thrilled to talk with Eva about this. Well, first of all, that title always stood out to me because 5 minutes to fix healthcare. I said to myself, well, what have I been doing all this time? But I love. Obviously, I was first exposed to you, with that TED talk, and so I'm sure we'll get into some of those. But I'll introduce Eva as the Senior Director of Community and Education at Good Days, but she's also a podcast host. And I'll say one more thing, and I'll let her talk more about herself. But one thing that stood out to me when I saw her LinkedIn profile was she said her life's mission is to improve human connection and communication in healthcare. And I love that. So Eva, I'll turn it over to you. If you want to say anything else that I missed, I'm sure there's more.
Well, thank you, Jim. It's really an honor to be on this podcast. Thanks, Todd, as well. This is a topic that is obviously near and dear to my heart. It is everything I live and breathe, even within my family life. And even though I want to touch on my personal relationship to this topic, I actually think it would be of service to explain my background in healthcare from a professional standpoint, because I somehow crammed in well over a dozen professional experiences in healthcare over the last 15 years. And that covers a wide spectrum, if not maybe the entire spectrum of healthcare. So I was pre-med and therefore had several clinical internships, one in which I worked as an unofficial medical assistant. So I saw a lot happening there. I studied neuropsychology, got a master's in nutrition science, so clearly couldn't decide what kind of scientist I wanted to be. Obviously didn't go to med school. Then I ended up founding a health tech startup. Did that for 4 years. It was actually about matching doctors and patients. Won't get into that now. And then from there, I ended up working at multiple healthcare startups, and that addressed a breadth of issues like continuity of care and payers and costs. So, I mean, I really hopped around in that way. And then I ended up leading a community of tens of thousands of people with chronic illnesses, mostly invisible and rare chronic illnesses. And then for the past 4 years, I've worked in marketing and media in healthcare, particularly podcasts. I've hosted, produced, directed, and again, all healthcare topics. And I mean, it just sounds ridiculous. I did all of this thinking that I was super unfocused, when really what I was curious. I wanted to investigate healthcare because I understood from a very young age that this system was broken. And I didn't really understand why. The same message kept popping up to me, but I was like, this can't be the be all end all, which is, spoiler alert, relationships. But I got to say, at the end of the day, that is really what everything came down to for me. And possibly most importantly, like all of the professional stuff aside, I've been a chronic patient for 20 years, over 20 years now. Wasn't diagnosed until about 3 years ago, properly. And then 9 years ago, I met my now husband, who is a physician. So I very much understand pretty much every facet of healthcare, some better than others. But I say all this because I want it to be clear that I have both compassion and understanding for everyone involved. I don't take sides. I'm definitely not doctor versus patient. If you see my TED Talk, that will be very obvious. And I think that sums it up pretty well. It was not succinct, but
That's
hopefully
okay. That's okay. Eva, I love what you're saying. I love where you're coming from. And that whole myriad of experiences has brought you back to one of the core essence or the core essence of good quality care, that relationship, right? It's so important, and it's so often dismissed in today's healthcare delivery system, and it's sad, because if it was there and if it was stronger, the waste would go down, and all those other things, and there would be better outcomes and what have you. And I'm speaking from experience. When I was seeing patients, I had so many good relationships. I mean, look at the book. Oh, here, shameless plug. We'll get it in early. I wrote a book with a patient, for goodness sakes, and now that we got this going on YouTube, I can do this every time. Uh, oh, so I think it's beautiful. Jim, I'm going to throw it back to you to get us rolling off with some questions here.
Yeah, so actually, I'm going to say something I didn't even have prepared, because one thing you mentioned about the impact that being a chronic patient, I think you said 20 years as a patient. That's one thing, just personally experiences that I've had going through nursing school. Okay, great. You have this ideal in your mind. This is how it's going to work. Then you get on the floor and you're, working as a nurse, and it's like, okay, you understand a little bit more. But then I've had my share of, chronic health issues. And as a patient, it opens your eyes to so many different things. If I can maybe ask you to dig into that a little bit more. I know we're talking about relationships. How did your time as a patient really really focus your thoughts on, yeah, this relationship really does matter? I'm sure there was frustration. Was there any insight that you found as a patient into, hey, this relationship between the provider and the patient is so important?
Thank you for asking that, Jim. It was certainly the catalyst for my investigation.
Or
The first instance that I remember of there being a disconnect was with a top doc in New York City, which is where I'm from. And it wasn't even necessarily that this was a cold or a heartless doctor either. It was a pretty standard interaction, which is what really fascinated me going forward. So I was a 12-year-old girl. And for some important context, I was a very serious ballet dancer at that time already, living and breathing it 6 days a week. And at that time, my diagnosis is I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, a connective tissue disorder. I also have fibromyalgia and a whole slew of other comorbidities that go with those. So at that time, it was only my right shoulder that was in a ton of pain. I apparently described it like a torn rotator cuff. They did all the tests, the x-rays, and there was no obvious answer. This doctor said to me, well, why don't you just stop dancing? That'll probably help. And my response to him was, why don't you stop being a doctor?
I just had a feeling that's what you were going to say. And I was like, I think I know where he was going with this.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like he was unfeeling, but it was a very small comment that clearly I have not forgotten to this day,
Yeah.
because he he did not get me. And he was not really listening to me because I shared with him just how important dance was to me. And what he heard was, she's overexerting herself, it's taking a toll on her body, but did not acknowledge the fact that it was part of my identity. And if you talk to EDS experts, some will say that it's a combination of ballet is a combination of both a positive and negative influence on loose joints. But was that doctor right? If I stopped ballet, would that have been helpful? Maybe. Maybe at the time that would have given me less pain, but it wasn't about it being the right clinical answer. It was about connecting with him. And because he said that, I disregarded what he said completely. And not just in terms of continuing ballet, but any awareness that it could be tied to my pain, and maybe even in denial. Perhaps I wouldn't be surprised if I look back on that time and pushed myself harder and tried to prove him wrong.
Well, and there's
Eh,
an opportunity there, right? I mean, if that relationship was more solidified or longer standing, perhaps you could have had that conversation, and it could have went in a completely different direction, right?
Exactly. Even if his advice was still the same, but he approached it differently, with the understanding that this was essentially the love of my life, being a dancer, he would have showed me empathy in this being a very difficult decision I had to make, or maybe how I could transition out of it, or how I could make it work for me, given my pain. He also, I don't remember what he diagnosed me with, but he did actually give me a diagnosis. And even the way he delivered that diagnosis, which I think was something with spondylitis, which really makes no sense. But he he delivered it like, well, I think I'm going to give you this because this seems to make a little bit of sense. And I want you to leave with a diagnosis. And I was like, I, I don't need you to put a label on me to make yourself feel good. It's okay if you don't know the diagnosis, but can you point me in another direction or give me some sort of support so I can leave this appointment feeling that I've been heard and cared for and that there is a next step? Anything, even PT, like, right? You can go to physical therapy without a diagnosis. Well, actually, depends on your insurance.
I was gonna say, wait a minute now.
It depends on your
Did
insurance.
you check the right box? Because if you didn't check the right box, we're gonna have to derail this train right now.
I do know some doctors will give a diagnosis and then be honest with the patient and say, I'm going to give you this so you can have physical therapy. But as long as you take care of the symptoms and what seems to be the general issue, then it doesn't really matter what the diagnosis is. A psychiatrist said to me many years ago, it does not matter what your diagnosis is as long as the treatment is correct.
Oh wow.
I wonder what you feel about that.
That's, you know what? I think I have so many comments to add here, Eva. It's unbelievable. I could probably start talking for hours, which is not the intent of this. But I have always said that I think as a physician or clinician, it is okay to say that you don't know what's going on. And I told that to Joshua in the book. I mean, we got to the point where he had so many struggles. Like I knew there was a major problem, and we thought it was at the cellular level. And I'm a family physician, right? So I'm trying to get him into an endocrinologist and all these other things. And I told him I don't know what's going on. And I think the best clinicians have that intestinal fortitude or that capacity to say that, but then to offer an opportunity or direction as to where to go. And perhaps one of the most powerful things I told Joshua was, um, you know, you have to, I believe you're going to get better, but you have to believe you're going to get better too. And that was a big turning point for him, because we still didn't have a cemented diagnosis, but it gave us a direction and it gave us some belief and it gave us some hope. And fast forward a year and a half later, he was better, he was. Jim, I want to throw it back over to you for a second there. If you wanted to double click on that or chime in at all.
Yeah, well, you're both just reminding me of that importance of relationship. And Todd, I'll make a shameless plug with your book again. You see, the format of the book is a conversation. And how many times, Eva, how many times, even Todd yourself, as a patient, have we gone into a room and you feel like you're being talked at, and you're being told this is what you need to do, rather than that conversation. And Eva, you mentioned, one comment made by your provider that hits you, that breaks that trust. I know you talk about trust in the relationship. One thing I wanted to ask Eva was one comment that she had made in the past, not here, was establishing trust or breaking it can happen in seconds, not even minutes. So I've been known to put my foot in my mouth. As a care provider, I'm usually on my best behavior. My wife will tell you, yeah, sometimes I talk before I think. So I understand that we can break trust in such a short period of time. But I want to ask you your opinion on how can we build that trust so quickly? I've always thought, this sometimes takes years to build that trust. What's one way that we as providers can build that trust quickly? Because we really don't have a lot of time, right?
Thank you for bringing that up, Jim. So I'm actually going to relate it back to what you just said with your wife, right? Like it could take just a couple of sentences or a couple of words to break trust
Sometimes
with your
just a
wife.
look, or sometimes just, yeah.
Totally valid. Agreed with that as well. So I like to use romantic relationships as an analogy for our doctor-patient relationships. You could use any social relationship, honestly, but romantic is the most extreme, I would say, and the ones that we cherish the most, the ones that we hold with the highest significance and value. And doctor-patient relationships, it really baffles me that we don't give them the same respect. We don't prioritize them the same way, because they could literally be the difference in life or death. And this could be a relationship that's short term, maybe one that you have one interaction between a doctor and patient, or a lifelong one. Now, when it comes to creating a sense of trust, just like in a marriage, in a partnership, there could be a single thing that you say that stays with you for the rest of your life, and maybe even changes the course of how you behave and how you feel about a certain thing. I mean, the moment I realized that my husband was the one for me was like a sentence, just something he said, and it all clicked together. And I realized that was it. He's the person. Now, to actually give some examples in a doctor-patient relationship, I'll actually start with one that my husband uses, and I'm very proud of him for this. He will say to his patients, he's a pediatric GI doctor. He often sees children with, or a lot of teenagers especially, with functional GI pain, meaning that essentially there's no clear diagnosis, but the pain is real. And he says to them, I believe you. Sometimes that is the only, because of a lack of time, and he has so much to relay and so much to ask, that is the only real point of connection, and that is enough. Because that validates so much of what a human inherently needs. I mean, we all need to feel a sense of belonging and security and connection, autonomy, and it really covers all of those. And some other examples are, I believe in you, right? Like Todd, that was what you were essentially saying with Joshua. You're not alone in this. We're in this together. Your well-being is my priority. Your input is valuable. Take your time. I'm here to answer your question. Like, these little, seemingly insignificant statements make all the difference in an interaction between two people. And this could be true in the doctor's office as well as in your bedroom when you're having a tiff. Do people know the word tiff, or is that an English term?
That was inspiring. I've got goosebumps on my arm listening to that. A fellow physician that can say to a patient, I believe you, is amazing. That is amazing, and so not utilized. There's so much psychosomatic stuff that occurs, within healthcare, and it's not always a thing that we can cut out or throw a pill at, or what have you. So that is just brilliant, just brilliant. I can't stress that enough. I'm gonna have to talk to your husband at some point about his practice and dig into that one a little bit. I'd love to learn more.
Well,
Jim, back. Oh, sorry, Eva, go ahead.
I did want to add to that a couple things. First of all, I have fibromyalgia, right? If someone had said to me at multiple visits that I believe you, had just added that, like a lot of the doctors would say, oh, there's something going on, we'll have to figure out what it is. Some definitely insinuated the it's all in your head notion. No one ever said that to me directly, but it was definitely inferred. But if someone had just said, I believe your pain, I can, in this moment, feel my whole body relax. I definitely have some trauma around being a chronic patient, to the point where I still feel like I need to explain myself to people who know and love me. Like, I have to voice the pain that I'm experiencing because I was not believed for so many years.
Yeah.
And I am very much not alone in this. So for my husband and his GI patients, ones that may or may not be caused by stress, which still elicits a physical ailment or reaction, so it's not like it's not real, it's very much real, saying that I believe you could possibly even be the treatment to it.
You know
So
what?
it's tremendously impactful.
Go ahead, Jim. Go ahead.
That's huge, even. And just, I know I'm guilty of, I'll jump right over that statement, I believe you. But that's stopping to focus on that relationship. My tendency is, okay, let's jump into what do we have to do to make this right? Or what can we try to see, and to stop and make that, even that second, those 2 seconds to say those words, establishes that connection. And I'm big, I know leading up to this, I've communicated that I'm big on communication, and I have to learn, I'm still learning, that more words does not equal better communication. And that's something I tend to just keep talking. And so maybe a question I'd like to present. It's easy for us to talk about those bad experiences, that one statement that, a provider says that just hurts that relationship. I think I want to focus on the flip side of that. How can we communicate better in the healthcare setting? We've already alluded to time. Time is an issue, that's a challenge. But what are some things maybe that we can keep in mind to improve that communication in order to improve that trust, in order to improve that relationship?
I have an answer that Todd has brought up many times in both his book and his podcast, and that is humanity. A reminder that every single person in this system, patients, doctors, staff, pharmacists, literally everybody that is touched and involved is a human. And that is what we all have in common. We all have the same basic needs that I spoke about, the same emotional needs. And we all have primarily the same experiences in life, like love and loss and achievement and family, or just work. I'm listing arbitrary things now, but there are things that we all have in common being on this earth. And we can absolutely bring that into healthcare. And like I said about the romantic relationship versus a healthcare relationship, we forget that there are two people that have lives that we're interacting with in this situation. It might as well just be like a husband and wife, or a spousal relationship, because we all need respect, communication, and trust to have thriving relationships. And that's going to be true regardless of where you place such a relationship. Now, what this looks like in action is at baseline being reminded of that. And when I say that, I mean, it has to be repeated. If you're going to essentially transform the way that you see healthcare, the way that you actually behave within the healthcare environment, it has to be something that you are reminded of constantly. And there are a lot of different ways to do that. And that could look like education, this being one of them, education and or inspiration, right? Listening to podcasts, reading books, uh, taking courses. I would love to have an influence on medical school programs and residency programs, things that are actually becoming part of our educational system. But then it can also be one-on-one conversations. It could be group conversations. There could be periodic staff meetings that remind their staff that, hey, these are people that you're talking to, and also you're a person and you deserve the same respect, communication, and trust. So one of the places I worked in the earlier days was Memorial Sloan Kettering. For those who don't know, it's one of the best cancer centers in America. And I love that once a month they would pull us into this room and show us a video about the patients that we have helped, seemingly indirectly. I was in clinical research, so I actually spent very little time interacting with patients at all. But they wanted to make sure we understood the good that we were doing on a regular basis. And I thought that approach was brilliant, because it's so easy to get disconnected from your work if you're not involved in patient care. You could do it even when you are involved in patient care, as we've seen.
Yep.
And so let's just say that as an example, if it was part of the structure of an institution to have those reminders as just part of how they run operations, I mean, that's a way that it can become the new norm. And that's why I'm working on different projects, and I don't know what the future holds and what I want to build and support others with, but I know that it's going to be around not changing, but transforming, which is something new entirely, in how we look at what healthcare should be, what it means, what it looks like. And that is recognizing the humans on either side and every side. By the way, this also looks like access too. So making sure that there is efficient knowledge and resources as part of this. And that comes through, and that is part of the relationship, supporting one another and what they need.
This is so good. As you were talking, Eva, I think I wrote down just like 37 ideas perhaps to go forward with, maybe 38, I'm not sure. But my keynote is the power of 1+1. And that can be extrapolated or interpreted in a whole host of ways. There's an opportunity when you've got a clinician, physician, whatever word you want to use, and a patient. There's an opportunity both ways. It should be a team game. There is learning to be had both ways. There's an opportunity for healing to be had both ways if you do it right. Some of my best interactions over the years were healing for me, frankly. And I was the one delivering care, quote unquote. But part of that is listening, slowing down and listening to the person in front of you. It's so important, and it's unfortunately often underutilized in our widget, RVU driven system that we have today. One of the tools I used in particular when I was struggling, and I got this from a homily at Mass. And it doesn't matter what your religion is or what have you, and that's not really what I'm talking about. It's more the thought process of looking at the human being in front of you. I would sometimes visualize that it was Jesus Christ sitting there. And regardless of your beliefs, that's an opportunity to slow down and realize that you have a fellow human being in front of you who wants and needs your love and help and understanding and appreciation. And that's what relationships, are all about. So this is just a beautiful, beautiful conversation.
Can I add one more
Yeah,
thing?
yeah, Jim, go ahead. Sorry.
I love this conversation, and you're making me think of just throughout my career, the best nurses that I worked alongside weren't the smartest, they weren't the most experienced. I mean, they could have been, but that wasn't the best ones were the ones that were able to connect with the patients. And I remember one in particular, it's my first year of nursing. I'm out on the floor and I see this, one, he was an experienced nurse, but he pulled up a chair, sat next to the patient bed, because so often we're talking down, to if it's a patient in bed or in, inpatient setting. And that's a threatening position. But the fact that he pulled up a chair, he had a busy shift, but he took the time to sit, get eye level with the patient and just listen. He asked questions and he listened. And then he had some encouraging words to try to inspire. But that ability to connect with the patient stood out to me. And I was just like, okay, that's what I want to be like. That's what I want to do. Because then moving forward, he could have a much greater impact than the next nurse that came on shift. And, they knew everything. They knew what the problem was, how to fix it, but they couldn't connect with the patient and inspire them towards, progress, towards healing, towards getting out of there.
Well, and oh my gosh, and to add on to that, when you do that, it's like time slows down.
Yes.
Literally, as a physician, it was like time slowed down, and the patients would feel like that. And there'd be interactions where I would only be in there, in the room for 10 minutes or whatever, and I would come out and I was like, oh my gosh, it was only 10 minutes. I felt like I was in there for an hour, and the patient feels like that too. And so much more is accomplished because you sat there, connected as a human being, and listened to the person in front of you. Beautiful, beautiful. Well, this might be a good opportunity to transition into a Ripple challenge question, which is my opportunity to do complete randomness. And so I was thinking about this when I went on my walk this morning. So there's no set way to answer this. Answer it however you'd like. I think, Jim, we'll start with you. Sunrise or sunset?
That's a tough one. I'd say it depends on where you are. I grew up in New Jersey. I live in New Jersey now, and I love the sunrise over the water. But my wife and I lived in the Bay Area in California for 3 years, and we love those sunsets. I think it just has to be over water. That's my answer. Can I answer like that?
Absolutely. You can answer however you want. This is our show today, so we can do whatever we want.
Perfect.
Eva, how about you?
Well, it's really boring to say ditto, but I think I feel the exact same way. I will say that I just moved into a new house that looks directly east, and my living room has floor to ceiling windows, and it just brings me joy every single morning when I see that sunrise.
Love it. I had one answer before you guys answered, but is there a word for like ditto times two? Is there a word for that? Because I
I
was
think that
thinking
works.
about what's that?
That works. Ditto times two.
Ditto squared, maybe. No, so I would have normally said sunrise because I'm kind of a morning person, but then I thought about it. It's being in the moment, and maybe that moment's in the evening. And I certainly remember times where the sunset was just absolutely gorgeous. But that probably speaks to this whole conversation of relationships and being in the moment and taking time, what have you. Jim, we probably have time for maybe one more question, and then after that, maybe we'll move to our um, plugs, if you will, for our specific endeavors. So fire away, my friend.
This might be too big of a question, too broad to cover, but Eva, I'll let you take it whatever direction you want. If I can simply say, what does progress look like? I think you've touched on that a lot, but how can we, measure? I don't know where to start. What does progress look like for a doctor's office, or maybe for an individual provider that's trying to improve this connecting on the humanity side? What does that progress look like?
I love that question. And I think everybody knows that I'm a big fan of doing something, right? We have so many layers of dysfunction from top to bottom in our current infrastructure that, in my mind, there isn't one simple thing to do to quote unquote fix the healthcare system in 5 minutes. Although, if everybody focused on relationships, it probably would be fixed in 5 minutes, to be honest with you. But, in my mind, it's take a pebble, find your pond, and do something. Perhaps that's just being kind to others. Maybe it's smiling throughout the course of the day. Maybe it's allowing humor to be a part of your office infrastructure instead of everything being so corporate. So, I guess that's my nebulous way to answer your question. And Eva, I would love to hear maybe your thoughts on this as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I do think one of the best takeaways from this is to ask yourself, what is my role in fixing healthcare? And again, that can be something as simple as being human with those that you're interacting with in the healthcare space. Just reminding yourself that that person across from you has a whole life. If that's, you're a patient going to the doctor's office and speaking to a staff member who's scheduling you, that person might have kids. They might have their own health concerns. They might be tired. And just having that understanding of them being an individual who has a world like you can make all the difference in how you interact with them and also feel about yourself. Everything begins with who we are being with ourselves and then who we are being for others. Now, I think overall what progress looks like, what I dream to see and feel is that there's a fundamental shift in mindset, how we perceive the relationship between humans in healthcare. And this could look like doctors being allowed and encouraged to be human, including speaking up about their mental health, and patients being more adherent to care because they actually trust what their doctors are saying to them. And also trust the healthcare system. That may happen one day, maybe. And it also looks like us being able to, on both sides, navigate costs. We haven't spoken about the elephant in the room, which is the exorbitant costs of healthcare. And I want to acknowledge that because relationship is also very much involved with that massive conundrum. And it shows up in a lot of different ways. Now, I will say when it comes to fundamental change of how healthcare is priced, that really is a ripple effect. But let's just say dealing with what the current system is, doctors having compassion for patients when there is something that is unaffordable and partnering with them on how to work with that. But then there's also preventative care and early diagnosis, and understanding treatment options, less readmissions. I mean, all of this affects the financial side of healthcare for the patient and the provider. And efficiency of appointment times can affect how often doctors are able to see patients in terms of RVUs. So not only because the time slots that they're given are used wisely, but that the doctors are also fed emotionally from those interactions rather than drained. This is a whole other topic, but from what I have observed and what I have read, and also really, talking to my husband about this and our respective doctor friends, the antidote to burnout and perhaps even moral injury is human connection. There is more to it, of course, and I'm not diminishing any of that, but I think unless doctors are able to connect with their patients and their colleagues in a meaningful way, I don't know if any of the other antidotes are really going to do the trick, not fully. I think one of the actual definitions of burnout is something about disconnection. Can you remind me what that term is?
Oh,
Disassociation?
well, there's probably a whole myriad of terms we could put in there, but I totally appreciate where you're coming from with this. And honestly, the term is escaping me because I'm so captivated by what you're saying.
It's something about not caring anymore.
I will say, this is brilliant. And there is so much gold in what has been discussed today. I hope the listeners have gotten just a ton from this and can take some of this into their world or their daily life. I'd like to offer you both maybe an opportunity for one more thought or one more comment. And also, please tell everybody how they can get a hold of you, and any websites that you want to share, that kind of thing. Jim, why don't you go ahead and go first in that regard, and then we'll toss it back over to you, Eva.
I don't think I have anything, too deep or enlightening to share, but I'll just, man, Eva, what you shared really hit me in terms of that connection. And I'll say, sometimes I think in nursing, and it's still, obviously I'm not at the bedside right now, but you stay connected with people who are at the bedside. And sometimes the connection that they have is they're burning out alongside other nurses, and that's not that's not a long term, but you connect with people who have a shared experience. I think that's the value of sometimes these support groups that patients have, and they can get with people who've been through the same or had a lot of questions that went unanswered, or even providers getting together and connecting there and saying, hey, we're experiencing the same things. How can we help each other navigate? So I think it's important, maybe an encouragement to providers and to patients to find those who have had maybe not the same exact experience. Everyone's experience is different, but who've had similar experiences. And even if they haven't overcome them or been through it completely yet, you can go through it together. And so as patients and providers, I think that will be helpful for the entire healthcare system if we seek to do that. And I think that just goes right back to the human connection. I'll just share, again, I think I already mentioned, I've been a registered nurse since 2007. I'm a clinical consultant for VIE Healthcare Consulting, a SpendMend company. And you mentioned it, Eva, about cost. That's what SpendMend does. They help hospitals save money. And I've been thrilled to see what they've been able to do, incredible things, but also to be a part of that, to say, hey, it ultimately comes back to the patient. So spendmend.com, viehealthcare.com. I'm on LinkedIn. You can reach out to me there. So I appreciate, again, Todd, the opportunity to be on this episode. And I love this topic. I love that I was a guest host for this topic.
Eva, your turn.
So before I let you know how to reach me or look into more things, there's something I realized I wanted to bring up. Actually, there's a billion things I want to bring up, but before we leave, I definitely wanted to touch on this. And that is something I do mention in my TED Talk. I guess that's one of my plugs is, if you haven't watched my TED Talk, please do. I hope that it inspires you. If you look up Eva Minkoff TED Talk or the name of this episode, you will find it. But what I mention in it is that each one of us is 100% responsible for the doctor-patient relationship. And the reason I want to touch on that is it's very easy to say, well, I'm not going to be a compassionate patient because the doctor's being rude to me, or vice versa. But we have an obligation to be there for one another, and we can create partnerships on our own. We can choose, we have the ability to choose how we react, how we respond, and how we be with ourselves and with other people, regardless of what the other person is doing, thinking, or feeling. And I think that might be one of the most empowering notions that I've understood, that we have the ability alone to change what healthcare looks like, what relationships look like. And so even worst case scenario where you're being there for the other person, being there for yourself and being there for the other person, but they're just not responding. There is power in who you are and what you put out into the world, even if it doesn't turn out the way you expect, even if it doesn't meet your expectations. You actually have the ability to shift what expectations look like for you, especially when you've done your best.
I don't know about you, Jim, but
Yeah.
I want to hear more. And what I found with this, Eva, it doesn't have to be perfect. Part of me, I'm a human being, right? Like I'm sitting here in a t-shirt that says like Devil's Ridge. And I think I slept in this one last night. I don't even remember. But that's the beauty of this, right? Like there's no one answer to how we're going to boil the ocean of the mess of healthcare. I totally understand where you're coming from. Be authentic when you're with your provider. Be yourself, be honest, be genuine. And honest, most people are going to appreciate that. It shouldn't be transactional. That's not what that should be. It's a team game. And the best outcomes are when the patient and the physician or clinician or whatever word you want to use are on the same page. That's when the magic happens. So Eva, why don't you tell us the best way to find you and maybe your website, and then I'll throw in my last little plug and we'll sign off.
Well, other than my TED Talk, you can definitely find me on LinkedIn if you search Eva Lana Minkoff. And the website associated with the TED Talk and probably anything I do going forward will be patientproviderconnection.com.
Love it. I love that. That's beautiful. And for me, you can find me on LinkedIn as well. I'm very responsive there. I'm on some other social media platforms, but that's probably more hit or miss. LinkedIn's the way to go. Our website is ourquadrupleaim.com. And then I also want to make a quick plug for medicineforward.org. It's an amazing group of positive change agents. We'd love to see you there. And, the reality is not everybody can spend time or join, but there's certainly opportunities to donate to an organization like Medicine Forward, who is on the cusp of making some big noise in the healthcare space for sure. So finally, thank you to both of you. This is a beautiful, heartfelt conversation that I hope reaches many, many people and they can appreciate it and take it and run with it. What positive ripple of change will you create today?